Let's talk about envy, the most fascinating of all cardinal sins. Yeah, I say most fascinating because when we fall prey to envy, we don't even consider it as committing a sin. So innocuous it seems. And yet, whereas other sins, they punish us eventually, envy punishes us here and now and continually. Now, I'm sure that all of us have had to combat envy at some point in our lives. The interesting thing is that this combat with envy is far more difficult for us than it was for our ancestors. Why? Because we are living in the information age. And information is fuel to the fire that is envy. Think about it. If there is somebody you're envious of, then it's one thing to be told that that person is doing well, and it's a different thing altogether to be staring at his picture in the social media, vacationing on a turquoise blue sea, in an expensive looking yacht, with important looking people. Anyway, be it the plain envy of our ancestors or the lethal and supercharged variant that we are facing, the basic question remains the same. How do we tackle envy? The plain and simple answer is compassion. The object of our envy is probably fighting battles on fronts that we know nothing about. This overall situation may not be as deserving of our envy as we deem it to be. Besides, he's probably worked really hard for that success. Why begrudge him that? And there, envy gone. But as we all know, compassion, like most other things plain and simple, is not easy to come by. And therefore, we'll need to revisit my question. How do we tackle envy? Well, another way could be to try and better understand it. And for that, we'll need to lay envy on the dissection table. We'll need to slit it open. We'll need to examine its moving parts. Let's do that. So, the first observation about envy is a rather elementary one: relatability. It's a fact well known that we are mainly envious of people we can relate to. Friends, colleagues, neighbors, people in the same profession. We are rarely half as envious of Elon Musk. The reason is simple. Vis-a-vis Musk, we are more envious of friends and colleagues because they're people like us. Life has given them, or had given them, the same kind of advantages, opportunity that it had given to us. Similar social backgrounds, similar economic backgrounds, similar social connections, etc. In fact, this people like us theory also explains why we tend to be more envious of people in the same age bracket as us, vis-a-vis people much older or much younger to us. Okay? It explains why we tend to be more envious of people of the same gender. So do you now see why envy hurts, why it stings? To a large extent, envy is a guilt trip. It's basically an allegation that people who had the same resources as you are doing far better, and the only reason you are left behind is because of your own sins of omission and commission. But wait, let us consider this. Is this allegation factual? Unlikely. When we take a closer look at it, we realize that it's nothing but a cognitive sleight of hand, an illusion of perception. Because when you consider the friend, the one who you thought had similar advantages as you, you'll realize that it's very likely that he, in fact, had some hidden talents, or a resourceful uncle, or some lucky breaks. Whereas Elon Musk actually had fewer advantages than what you had. So, if we are to be fair, we shouldn't be discriminating against poor Mr. Musk. We should be equally envious of him. What will that achieve? I'll get to that in a moment. Before that, my second observation about envy. A couple of months back, I happened to be chatting with a friend of mine, an utter gentleman by the name of Sandeep Bhandari. Uh, I think we hadn't talked to each other since college, and that is the reason the conversation was confined to macro topics, generally reminiscing the good old IIT days. One of the things we were talking about was the joy of being surrounded by such talented people. Lucky for me, I was telling my friend that during our time at IIT, I rarely felt envious of our college mates. My friend replied that he too almost never felt envy during his stay at IIT. He then, in fact, informed me that he keeps telling his wife about this no envy thing, but she doesn't believe him. Now, I'd always thought that my not being envious was some sort of a rare phenomena, a lucky break that I'd got. But when a friend reported similar symptoms, I got thinking. Then a couple of days later, it struck me that my not being envious, our not being envious, was not a coincidence. It was a defense mechanism. You see, since the human brain has threshold limits for all kind of cognitive and emotional loads, it's only consistent that there should be a threshold limit for envy as well. Apparently, the human brain can handle only a limited amount of envy. It can at one time be envious of only a limited number of people. And when that number or when that quantum of envy is exceeded, the envy fuse blows off. And envy collapses into something like indifference or inspiration. So I guess one way to get rid of envy would be to start being envious of Mr. Musk and Shah Rukh Khan and Lionel Messi and Roger Federer. And I say, why limited to living people? Let's also be envious of Aldous Huxley, Leo Tolstoy, John von Neumann, Richard Feynman. All we need to do is be envious of this illustrious bunch, and our brain's defense mechanism will do the rest. It will dwarf, it will dilute the envy we have for friends and colleagues. If not actually render that envy totally irrelevant. Of course, being genuinely envious of the illustrious bunch is not an easy task, but that's another story. Which brings me to my next observation from the dissection table. Envy rarely comes unadulterated. It's usually mixed up and camouflaged with other emotions. And in this camouflage lies envy's capacity to wreak havoc. Duryodhana from Mahabharata, he was envious of the Pandavas. But this envy had found a safe hiding place, a justification in Duryodhana's emotion of being wronged. Be it being wronged by Draupadi, or be it being wronged because a bunch of suitors to his throne suddenly turned up at the palace one day. Yes, perhaps Duryodhana was indeed wronged. But had he been able to segregate this emotion of being wronged from his emotion of envy, he wouldn't have refused those 5 villages to the Pandavas. And I'm guessing that would have resulted in a better denouement for him. Another example of, everyday example of an envy camouflage is when you mix envy with plain simple competition. You'll observe that when a workplace competitor appears to be finding joy in some sort of an achievement or possession, it's highly likely that you too start desiring that same thing, even though your innate nature had no great need for that thing in the first place. Envy has just made you take on unnecessary distress. Bottom line, when dealing with envy, it's always prudent to try and figure out what are the other emotions in that envy cocktail. Now, while envy can sometimes blur our view, as we just saw, it can at other times make that view more clear. Envy can reveal to us the disparity between our beliefs and actions. Let's take up a thought experiment. Let's imagine that the instruments which are used to measure brain activity could also accurately measure human happiness and bliss. And that these measurements were to reveal that the Dalai Lama is the happiest and most blissful person on earth, which he probably is. Who, then, would most men be more envious of? The Dalai Lama, or a youngish George Clooney. Clooney, the rich and handsome. Clooney, the profuse dater of women half his age, who in the movie Gravity chose to float away into outer space rather than be stranded with a woman who didn't fulfill that half-age criteria. Clooney it is. So you see how envy brings to light this important dissonance, that we want our beliefs to be based upon relevant facts. We want to be happy, but we seldom allow those relevant facts to be the basis of our actions. We choose Clooney. Well, let me end my talk with a short story from the Puranas. I mean, it's not exactly a story about envy, but hey, I mean, no harm in a bit of oblique interpretations if they happen to drive home an important point. So, allow me to invoke the story of the demon Bandasura. Bandasura, when encashing a boon granted to him by Shiva, asked that whenever in a fight, half his enemy's strength should become his. Now, even while Vandasura was a demon, he knew that all he needed was half. He knew that he had something of his own as well, and that something was sufficient to tilt the scales in his favor. Envy, it urges us to desire for the positions, the possessions, the qualities of others. But we need a desire for the whole of what others have. Like Bandasura, we should have faith in that something which we already have. And when we stop desiring for the whole and desire for just a part of what others have, then envy ceases to be envy. It becomes inspiration. Thank you.